through hiking. I'm not sure I'll ever do such a thing myself, but it sure is great hearing stories from the trail. That's what we're talking about today on this edition of the Great Outdoors Photography Podcast, episode 148 for July 19, 2022. Hello and welcome to the Great Outdoors Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Brent Bergherm, and I'm all about helping you pursue your photographic purpose in the great outdoors. For those of you that have been here for a while, thank you so much for being here. I definitely appreciate it. And for those of you who are new, welcome. I'm so glad you found us. And please do remember to hit that follow or subscribe button, whichever is the language that your podcast player uses. I'd love to have you stick around and listen to all the great shows we have coming up. And of course, explore that back catalog. The show used to be called Latitude Photography Podcast. And a few episodes ago, I changed the name. I changed kind of sort of directions a little bit, kind of a micro pivot of sorts. And we're really just talking about the great outdoors and how wonderful it is to get out there and make some amazing photographs and have some amazing experiences out there. All the while traveling, of course. We're not giving up on our travel idea. You know me, I love to travel and I love to get out there and I love to see the world and I love to explore and to experience all these wonderful places in the great outdoors. Now, just one quick announcement before we get on to our main conversation, and that is I myself am heading to Alaska soon. Specifically, I'm going to the Ketchikan area, and I'll be talking all about these plans that I've got, basically the reason why, how it's coming together, how I'm able to do it on the cheap. I'm not trying to be cheap. I'm just trying to be really frugal in what I'm spending and how I'm going about it. But I do wonder if I could ask a favor if I have a listener that is in the Ketchikan area. And really, I've been looking at the map. It's not like there's much. There's no spread. There's no sprawl. So if you're in Ketchikan, if you're in that area, I'm wondering if you might be able to give me a ride. Basically, what I'm looking to do is either hire a cab, so take a cab, or if someone is willing to take me out to a camping site, that would be absolutely amazing. And if not, no problem. It is all good. I will just use a cab or I will hike and I will get out there myself with my own 2 feet and I'll just hike all the way out there. Not a problem. Again, I will tell you all the details in the next episode, but I just figured I would announce it right now because this next episode is going to be released just before I am getting on the plane and getting up there to Ketchikan. Basically, the idea is I'd rather hire one of my listeners than hire a taxi, if that's at all possible. And maybe you, one of my listeners, is a taxi driver in Ketchikan. That'd be amazing. So whatever the case is, I'm just curious if that's a possibility. Now, for this or for any other way that you want to communicate with me about the show here, I have activated the email address. So Brent at thegreatoutdoorsphotographypodcast.com. That definitely is a lot of tapping if you're on your phone, but Brent at thegreatoutdoorsphotographypodcast.com. That email will get right to me either on my computer or on my cell phone, and we'll be able to just take your communication, whether you have suggestions for the show, you have questions, anything else along those lines, use that email address, Brent at thegreatoutdoorsphotographypodcast.com. If you happen to still be using my old email for Latitude Photography Podcast, and you'll hear some of those announcements in old episodes saying, email me at, or whatever the case is, that is still good too. It's just going to automatically forward. So when I respond to you, you're going to get a response from this email address, Brent at thegreatoutdoorsphotographypodcast.com. There are a few links right at the front of the show notes. Those are going to be the links for, and what I mean by show notes is the show notes for your app, wherever you're listening to this episode. And the first link is the link to the website, which is the extended show notes, and has all the photos for the photographs that we're talking about. And then also to join my email list for announcements, updates, and sometimes new product announcements. Those are the first two links that you'll find there in your show notes for the app. And then, of course, once you're on the website itself, that's where you're going to see a little bit of the extended show notes idea. Definitely you'll see the photographs. And then we have some of those other items, whether it's my affiliate links with like Lens Rentals and Greg Benz's Lumenzia and a few other things like that. And I just invite you to go ahead, get on there, take a look at the show notes, and take a look at those photos as we're talking about these items. So without any further ado, let's head on over to my conversation with Jeremy Schwartz about through hiking the Appalachian Trail. All right, today's conversation, I am joined by Jeremy Schwartz. And Jeremy, thank you so much for being here. It's going to be great to talk about your through hike of the AT. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brent. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, this thing, just a couple of weeks ago, we were in the Palouse together, and you were on my workshop, my shoot and print workshop, and you had mentioned just kind of in passing, we were just kind of getting to know each other a little better and whatnot, and you had mentioned in passing that you had done a through hike of the AT, the Appalachian Trail, and probably I've mispronounced that because I know a lot of people will say, no, Appalachian Trail is the more correct pronunciation. So that's my Midwest, I guess, accent coming into it since I was born and raised in the Chicago area. But anyway, I was just like, you know what? This is something I've always wanted to have some type of conversation about a through hike. So I'm just thrilled to have you here. And let's have you start off just the very briefest of definitions of what we mean by a through hike.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so at the fundamental level in the hiking community, a through hike is basically any long hike on a trail where you're ending at a different point than where you started.
Okay.
So out and backs are not through hikes, and loops are not through hikes. But if it's like 100 miles or more and you're ending at a completely different location, it's generally acceptable to call it a through hike.
Yeah. 100 miles or more seems extremely daunting. And we're going to get into it and we're going to unpack all of that because it's just that, I guess, that next level of dedication to the craft, dedication to the experience of backpacking that does excite me. Whether or not this is something for me, I just have to be honest, I don't know. But hopefully I'll have a clearer idea when we're done with this conversation. But I really would love the listeners to learn a little bit more about you. Just whatever you'd like to tell us, wherever you wish to start, and certainly your photography and how that all plays into your life, wherever you'd like to start.
Absolutely. So I think it's simplest just start at the beginning. And so I got into photography and hiking at about the same time, around 2014, 2015, while I was in college. And I went to school in New York State, and my campus was very close to where the Appalachian Trail runs through New York. So at that kind of formative time in my life, I connected with the earth, and the Appalachian Trail just happened to be one of the trails that I would go on. I would to hike on on my weekends, and so it just kind of resonated with me in like at a subconscious level. And then a few years on, I kind of mentally committed that once I was finished, I guess just back up 1 second. So I joined the military way back in 2008, but then 2016, I graduated college. And around that time, I mentally committed that eventually someday I would make a through hike. And kind of implicit with that was of the Appalachian Trail, because I had that connection with it from college. So I'd been on part of it, and I knew that it ran 1,000 miles to the north and 1,000 miles to the south, and it's just kind of something that was fascinating, and that I could experience that myself.
Yeah.
And so then in 2021, it was my opportunity. The stars aligned, and I had that whole year to pursue that. So I did it in about 5 months, from April 2021 and finished in September.
So from April all the way through to September, you were on the trail in some way, shape, or form. Certainly, maybe you had some kind of breaks or whatever, because certainly you're not going to carry enough food to last that whole time. But
definitely, it would be
basically
that's pretty impossible.
yeah, you were dedicated. You were on the trail. This was your life for that time frame, April to September 2021.
Yep. And a good way to think about a really long distance through hike on one of US's Triple Crown routes, what they're called, is the big long trails, the Appalachian Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail. They're all over 2,000 miles long.
Wow.
And so one way you can think of doing those is they're not really, you don't think of it as a 2,000 mile hike. It's more like a series of section hikes all stitched together.
Sure.
Because especially with the Appalachian Trail, the AT, there are many towns along the way where you can get off trail for a couple days, resupply, and kind of recuperate to some extent.
Yeah.
And so you can think of it as you're starting at one spot and then you're ending at the next town or wherever you want to stop. And then you can think of that as once you get back on trail as a completely new hike, because you're refreshed, you've resupplied in town and all of that. So think of it as just a string of section hikes that last a week or so.
So each section hike is roughly a week, and then you're just stringing these all together for several months at a time, basically.
Right.
Okay. So a fundamental question I'm curious about, why does this interest you? Why? You kind of mentioned, you had the time, you were interested, but what's that deeper drive that says this is how I need to spend April, May, June, July, August, September, that's 6 months. This is, you're spending half a year consistently, just why, I guess, is my fundamental question there.
Well, there's thousands of through hikers between the three Triple Crown trails every year. And I'd say everybody has their own reason for it. But
sure.
for me, it was, I'd been in the military for several years prior to 2021, and I was getting out that year in March as my last day in uniform, and I needed a transition to go back being a civilian again, and I kind of like a bookend to that chapter in my life. And,
okay, yeah.
And for me, that was the ideal way to do it, was to spend my exile myself to the woods for half a year.
Well, that's awesome. I can see that making a lot of sense, especially the way you put it as a bit of a bookend to what that chapter of your life was, what it was about, and effectively, I guess we could look at it, and please correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but really you're just kind of decompressing maybe, and you're getting ready for the next chapter of your life. And
yeah, absolutely. That was the mindset.
Yeah, very cool. Well, that's awesome. Very good. And then you chose the Appalachian Trail for a reason over these other, whether it's the CDT or the PCT. Why did you choose the Appalachian Trail?
Yeah, I think there are two big reasons why. One was that I had that past connection with it since I'd already been on parts of it. But the other one is that logistically it's the easiest.
Okay.
And in terms of elevation, it's actually the hardest of the three. You wouldn't think that, since the Appalachian Mountains aren't particularly large, but there's a lot of mountains, and so you're constantly going up and down. So it's very challenging, but it's also, if you know what you're doing, it's the logistics are much easier than the other two trails, because, like I said before, there are towns all along the way. So, and there were more towns than you can even stop at. There were many towns that I passed up and never even went to. Whereas on the CDT and the PCT, there's a lot fewer places to get off the trail, and so it becomes a little bit more difficult to plan those stops. And also, you've got the deserts in the south for both of those trails, so you have to carry a lot of water in the beginning. You have to worry about the weather a lot more than or the Appalachian Trail, where as long as there's not a snowstorm coming through, you're probably fine.
Yeah. And that's one thing when I look for a place to hike, I'm always looking for a natural water source so that I can draw from and filter so I can not have to carry all that water. And it sounds like the AT has just, I would think anyway, it has just ample water sources.
Yeah, so there are a couple exceptions to that, but for the most part, yes, there's a water source every couple miles along along the AT.
Nice. Yeah, that would be a huge bonus because otherwise, water's heavy.
It sure is.
And it's probably my one, if I were to call anything a weakness, if I have to go hungry for a while, I think I can last a little bit, but boy, the minute I get dehydrated, it just goes quick.
Mm-hmm.
And the hydration, I don't know. I imagine this is the same for a lot of people. I don't know, but I sweat really buckets, it seems, and when I get moving, and water is just hugely important. And I want to always have that water source. I have looked at places that I'm looking at going, and I'm like, well, no, I'm not going to hike there because there's no water source that I can verify is available. And so I'll just go somewhere else. And it's just not something I want to put myself in that situation.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a big strength of the Appalachian Trail, the AT, is that it has many water sources. And furthermore, and we might be jumping the gun a little bit, talking about another topic, but
sure.
I have a secret weapon that I used, and a lot of hikers use, especially for the AT, is this app that's now called Far Out. And so it provides it's a map of the entire trail, and all along the way they have pins along the map that for landmarks for something points of interest. That's the word. They have points of interest all along the way, and a huge number of those points of interest are water sources. Whether they're permanent or seasonal. And people that use the app can comment on those points of interest and say there was water here, there was no water here on this date. And so you can even look forward without even having been on that stretch of the trail. You can look ahead, see what other people have said, and get an idea for how scarce or abundant water will be looking forward. So you can plan ahead with how much water you're going to carry.
The Far Out app is what you called it, right? Far Out?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds like a really good app because especially for someone who is a little bit concerned, a little bit trepidatious about getting out there, things to be concerned about and whatnot. This just gives you that peace of mind, and that I just love it. That's really cool. I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yeah, it was definitely a valuable tool. I've only used it on the AT. They have several other They have quite a few other selection of maps on there, but the value of it kind of really comes down to those other users. And so I'm not sure how many other users on other trails. So your results may vary if outside of the AT.
Sure. So tell me a little bit, maybe this app was helpful for you when you were planning and preparing for this hike. But tell me about some of the other ideas of what you're prepping for, probably from the very beginning. I mean, you got out of the military, I think you said in March.
Yep.
And so the very next month here in April, then you're planning on not having a permanent residence, and you're going to be a vagabond for 6 months. Tell me about that planning process. Certainly you want to know about food as well and how you did that, but really about just setting up expectations with friends and family, setting up expectations for yourself. Did you have any bills you have to continue paying or anything along those lines? How do those things get worked out?
Yeah, so I guess for me, preparation came in three forms. It was financial, mental, and the physical preparation. On the financial side, I estimated, and it turned out to be a fairly good estimate that I would spend about $1,000 of expenses along the trail that are things that I would not have spent if I wasn't on the trail, such as like replacing gear, staying at at hostels and hotels, things like that. So that was extra money that I set aside specifically for the trail. And then of course I did have some expenses, that kind of fixed expenses that I had to pay whether I was utilizing them or not, because I do own a home.
Okay.
So I was continuing to pay a mortgage while I was on the trail. So I had that set aside. And I'd been thinking about this for years, so it wasn't like suddenly I have to save $10,000.
Right.
Yeah, so I saved $4,000 specifically for trail expenses, and then 4 to 6 months of expenses, fixed expenses, such as like car car insurance and the mortgage, things like that. Small thing, not small things, but those kind of expenses.
Regular everyday life things.
Right. So that's financial, and then mental. This is kind of I guess a little more nebulous, but for me, I'd been, thinking about it, mentally committing to it for, a couple years prior to actually doing it. And I was really looking forward to it. I don't think you could do a through hike if you didn't actually want to do it. It's
Right.
one of those things that you really have to, self-commit to. And if you don't want to do it, you're not gonna finish.
Yeah, there has to be that internal drive that brings you through to completion. I just can't imagine it being a success. It's just going through something like this, 6 months walking. You have to have some really strong internal drive, internal purpose to make this thing worth it for you. And then, of course, to be a success. Otherwise, it's going to be absolute misery. Mm-hmm. And certainly, I don't think we're interested in getting ourselves into something like that. So yeah, that mental prep, and you saying a couple of years of, psyching yourself up for it, that is a lot of time. To me, it sounds like a lot of time anyway. Though this is coming from the guy who I'm almost always planning a year. I like to almost always plan like a year in advance. So I'm already thinking, what am I going to do next summer? What am I going to do next fall? Let alone this coming winter and spring, as far as those bigger type items are concerned. And so I guess over the last decade or so, I've kind of gotten myself into that mode of thinking of really start planning ahead, and then things can more easily fall into place. Mm-hmm. But there's also something to be said about being spontaneous too. But in something like this, I think it's hard to be spontaneous.
Yeah, and I do want to clarify one quick thing, is that I didn't need to spend several years thinking about it. It was just, I was stuck I was locked into a contract. And I had been looking forward to it for several years.
Yeah.
I would say, as long as you're thinking about it at least one season ahead, that's all you absolutely need. Yeah. I think several months of thinking about it, planning it, getting yourself mentally prepared is all you really need. But yeah, the more time is the better. Yeah,
it's for sure. I think it's for that clarification, because certainly this wouldn't be something, I don't think for myself, I would look at it and say, summer 2024, summer 2025, this is what I'm going to do. I might put it on there as a possibility maybe, but certainly when it comes to a year beforehand, that's where I would okay, it's time to make the decision. Is this going to happen or not?
So for the last category was the physical preparation. This is kind of a twofold. Is one, the big thing was having the right gear in advance.
Yeah.
This is kind of the most, for me, the most important piece of the preparation was just making sure that I knew I had all of the gear that I needed for while on trail, and I knew how to use it. And this actually did take me several years. I was developing my backpacking strategy for several years before I actually committed to the trail. And so, you practice on overnight trips, making sure that you know how to use your tent and making sure that your sleeping bag is right for you, those kind of things. And that you have everything that you need for the most likely contingencies.
And so what kind of gear are we talking about? Are you one of the ultralight type hikers? What kind of tent, what kind of backpack? I'm just curious, not that it's a make or break situation, but it's just interesting to have something for us, for that person out there listening, that they want to search something up just to get the ideas started. I'm just kind of curious if that's something we could briefly touch on.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and I was not an ultralight backpacker. So I think my base weight was somewhere around 30 pounds. And
Oh, wow.
and a big factor of that was my camera, actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was in a sense, I was the opposite of an ultralighter.
It's hard to be when you're carrying such camera gear with you.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I tried to keep my camping weight lighter when possible. So I have a one person tent, so I think it weighs about 2 pounds.
Oh, that's nice.
It can only fit myself and my backpack in it. It's not, definitely you wouldn't call it roomy, but it definitely worked for me.
Cool.
And speaking of my backpack, it was an Osprey backpack.
Okay.
I think in terms of backpacks, a lot of thru hikers, like the lighter the pack, the better, and then the volume is not as important to thru hikers.
Yeah.
Mine was a 65-liter bag. I think it was around it's about 4 pounds. So it's not a light bag, but for me, the most important thing was it was comfortable.
Yes.
If you try and hike with an uncomfortable bag, it doesn't matter how light it's going to be, how light it is not going to be a good time.
I've done that, and it was torturous. Just torturous at the end of the hike. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
But at 4 pounds on your pack, that's really good. Mine, I just weighed the other day because I'm preparing to go to Alaska here in a couple of weeks. And it comes in at just over 6 pounds. And I'm just like, oh, I wish I could get a new bag. But I'm actually going to be camping when I do that. I won't be doing any serious backpacking because specifically where I'm going, the trails are listed as day use only. So I'm like, all right, that's fine. I'll just camp at some designated campsites and I'll do day hikes. But still, that 6 pound bag, when I am backpacking, it's just one of those things that every pound adds more to it. And it ends up being a pain in the shoulders, if anything else.
Absolutely. Yeah. But if you're doing a lot of backpacking, it really pays to have a good, comfortable bag. I guess there's multiple schools of thought on it. For me, my hip belt was a pretty critical thing.
Sure.
And so with my Osprey bag, it has a really beefy hip belt. And when it was clipped on, I'd swear it took off like 15 pounds off my shoulders.
Nice.
When I was all loaded up, I was probably around 40 pounds on average with all my food and water and all the other gear. So it was probably about 40 pounds. But I on my shoulders themselves, I'd swear it felt more like a 25-pound bag.
Nice.
The hip belt is able to support so much of my weight.
Yes, very definitely important. Very much important. So you've got we talked about a little bit about your tent, roughly 2 pound tent, 4 pound bag. What about your other things? Like how much food, if you're saying your sections are in the neighborhood of a week at a time, how much food as far as the weight is concerned are you usually taking with you?
Yeah. So food, it's kind of funny. Maybe it should have, but food was not something that I really planned out ahead of time. I didn't have a great idea of what I was going to carry. I kind of developed it as I went along.
Okay.
And so actually for my first couple sections, I was carrying like 7 days or so worth of food. At least what I consider to be 7 days worth of food. And I think on average, it came out to be about a pound of food per day. So
yeah, that's about what I did.
Roughly 7 pounds of food. But towards the end, once I got into Virginia, for certainly, my considerations was calories, more than weight. And so initially, I was carrying about 2,000 calories of food a day, and I pretty quickly realized that that's not enough.
Sure.
For through hiking. If you're hiking all day, you probably want to carry close to 3,000 calories of food.
Yeah, when I was preparing for my backpacking trip last September, I had someone comment out because I was like, well, I'm taking 6 pounds of food. And these are all, freeze dried and everything along those lines. So they're all very lightweight type stuffs. And someone commented, it's like I'm going to be on a diet or whatever. And it turned out to be actually a really good thing, but I was only gone a week. So the fact that I did just that for a week, I think is probably what worked for me, where in your case, when you're going a lot longer and you're just sustained that way, it's probably your body's going to tell you something otherwise, I think.
Yeah, there is this phenomenon called the hiker hunger, where people are just constantly hungry. And it is a kind of low grade starvation but it's not through lack of calories. It's because you're burning too many.
Yeah.
And so if people don't adjust how much they're eating, they'll stick with a 2,000 calorie diet like your average person might do. And when you're sitting at home, that's more than enough. That's certainly enough. But then when you're hiking, you're burning 3,000 to 4,000 calories. You're not eating close to enough food. So even though you're eating plenty, you're still starving.
Yeah.
And so I was saying at the beginning, I was carrying 7 days worth of food. So I could theoretically go out for a week, literally 7 days between resupplies. But as I got further along, I realized that, there were so many resupply opportunities that I only needed to carry about 5 days at most.
Okay.
And I would actually plan it out. Like I would get to town and I would look at the map, see where did I want to stop next, and then plan and figure out how many days that would take, and then carry enough food for that leg.
Did you ever get in trouble with anything like that? Like where you were delayed, you had a storm, maybe you just decided to take a day off and just not hike, and then you ran out of food? Anything like that happen?
So I don't think I ran out of food at any point. There was one day I was on the northern part of Tennessee, right as I was about to cross into Virginia. I was camping alone, and a bear walked into my camp and
nice.
attacked my food bag, which was an ursack, so it was tough, bear resistant, and so the bear didn't get my food, but it did destroy my food.
Oh no.
But luckily for me, it was the day before I was getting into town anyway, so I just lost that day's food.
Okay. Wow.
But if it had been the beginning of a leg, I would have been in trouble. I would have had to, if I was still at the first couple of days, I would have had to go back, or even hike to the nearest road and get a shuttle or a taxi of some sort to bail out quickly.
Huh. So the ursack was that something that hangs in the tree, or was it on the ground?
Yeah, I tied it to a tree kind of at shoulder level.
Oh, okay.
So it was easy access for both people and bears.
Yeah.
But the bear can't walk off with it because it's tied to the tree.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I just bought, it wasn't an ursack, but I bought one for when I'm in Alaska, because the regulations they have is to say, keep your food in your vehicle. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to have a vehicle. So I'll have to hang it, I suppose, unless they have some kind of cages or something there, because I've seen that at other places where they just have these big metal bins that you can put your food in. Then I'm out of luck, unless I hang it, of course. So that's what I'm planning to do. So I bought one that's waterproof. I had one already that I used. It's not waterproof, but I was like, it's going to rain when I'm there, so I better get something that's waterproof.
Yeah, in Southeast Alaska, that's a safe bet.
Yeah. Tell us about any other gear besides camera stuff, because I want to talk about that separately, but any other gear that stands out, anything that you needed to, like you had mentioned earlier, this either learning how to use it or just, getting in the groove with using it, anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the other essential gear was, a sleeping pad.
Sure.
And the sleeping bag, which for me was a quilt. So it was which made it a bit lighter than a normal sleeping bag because it wasn't a mummy style. So there was no material under me. It was just wrapped over me.
Yeah. I've come to really like the quilt myself.
It's definitely, it's really good if it's not very cold. I find that if it's below freezing at night, then it any little draft has a tendency of sneaking through at some point of the night. So
I'm a witness.
it
I
definitely
can
has
concur.
pros and cons.
Yes. Oh my. Yeah, when I did some car camping with it, I also brought along this really thick blanket, wool blanket that I bought in Mexico. And so I put that underneath everything. So that was my ground insulation. Then my air pad, my sleeping pad. And then this blanket is big enough that it wrapped over me, over the quilt and over me. And that was great when it got below freezing. But without it, yeah, the quilt is definitely not very, like you said, it finds ways to seep its way in. Mm-hmm. The cold does. All right, so let's talk specifically about camera gear. And I put a question in the Facebook group. If anyone is listening, you're not a part of the Facebook group, just do a search for the Great Outdoors Photography Podcast there on Facebook. And you can ask to join the group. You need to have my name filled in there. My name is Brent, or you can put in Jeremy's name or any other recent guests we've had on the show, and then a couple other questions to answer there in order to get in. But Kevin Cowley, he wanted to specifically know, exactly what is what kit did you bring, but also more importantly, just this whole idea of charging it, keeping the batteries fresh. Maybe how many batteries did you have? And let's talk about your kit for a little bit there.
Can do. Yeah. So to take one step back, when I committed myself to doing the through hike, I also committed myself to carrying a full size camera the whole way with me, because I did not want to compromise that. I think that was kind of part of my mission, because cool. I got into photography and hiking at the same time, so they're kind of they're interlinked with each other in my mind. So I was committed to do photography the whole way with along the way. So the whole time I had with me my Canon R5 with the RF f4 70-200 f4. So I think I don't have it weighed out right now, but I think it's around 4 pounds if I recall correctly. That lens and that camera together, about 4 pounds.
Okay.
And I only had one spare lens with me, which was my my RF 35 millimeter prime, which is a nice small lens. Although if I had done the through hike this year, I would have been carrying the 16 millimeter prime instead, because I wanted it for a wide angle frame, a wide angle view, and 35's certainly not the widest, but it was definitely better than 70 mil, which was what I was carrying. So those are that was the camera and lenses I had the whole time. And
so a 35 prime and a 70-200.
Yes.
Interesting. All right. Yeah, because like you mentioned, the 35, it's wide, but not very wide, not extreme wide by any means. And then your 70-200 for sure. I mean, that's a very, very extended length for a landscape type experience. So tell me, I guess a little bit on the thought of these lenses. I'm assuming this is kind of these lenses tend to fit your vision.
Yes, I'm a big fan of the telephoto look in landscape photography, and so I knew that I wanted to have a longer lens. I knew 24-70 wasn't going to cut it for me, because I'd done that years past. I'd go hiking with a 24-70 and a long lens, and I would routinely want to take off the 24-70 because it just wasn't enough reach for what I was trying to get. But for a through hike, there's no way I could carry a 24-70 and a long lens. So I compromised by going with 70-200, and the f4, which is for Canon, is a really compact small lens. It's kind of a minor miracle how compact it is.
Nice. Yeah, you had that there at the workshop, and it is definitely a pretty smart looking lens. I also like I have the EF mount 70 to 300, and that is a nice compact lens too for the reach that it has. I just love that lens, and hope that they could reproduce that in the RF mount. But anyway, we'll not get down that kind of a rabbit hole of discussion. Tell us about because we're going to look at pictures a little bit later. So we'll talk more about the lenses and stuff specifically then, but your plan for just keeping yourself charged up with your batteries.
Yep. So the power plan was kind of a big thing. I thought about that for a good bit beforehand as well, and kind of refined it as I went along. So I brought with me, including the one that was in the camera, I had three camera batteries with me. And I also brought with me a USB battery charger. So if I needed to, I could take my battery brick, which is an Anker 20,000 milliamp hour battery, and I could charge my camera batteries with that using my USB battery charger. But as things rolled out, as things progressed, I kind of came to realize that if I use my camera smartly, such as always turning it off when I wasn't actively taking a shot, those three batteries would last a week easily.
Right. Yeah.
So I wouldn't need to charge the batteries in the middle of the hike, and so I could just, ride those three batteries. Each one would usually last about 2 days. And so that would get me through that section, and then I just make sure that they're all fully charged back up during my my rest day in town.
And when you do a rest day in town, you're staying in a hotel?
A couple times it was a hotel, but more frequently it was actually a thing called a hostel, which in America are not super well known. Maybe some people don't think there are any hostels in America, but especially along the Appalachian, the AT, and trail communities, there are definitely hostels out there which is basically, they're like hotels, except the lodging is in public areas and in common rooms. So you typically sleep in a bunk bed, and then there would be like a dozen other bunk beds in that same room. And so it's community area. It's definitely there's a certain, it's kind of a lifestyle kind of thing. It definitely has its pluses and minuses. Safety was never a concern for me. I never felt unsafe in a hostel. Maybe, especially during the pandemic, you may concern yourself with disease. But in 2021, at that point in the year, it wasn't a big issue. I did hear about some people getting sick on trail, but honestly, I heard about more people getting Lyme disease than coronavirus.
Yeah, definitely. That's not something we should even chuckle at, but that's definitely, I could see that being a much bigger concern on the place like that.
Yep. So and every town, there's usually at least one hostel and at least one hotel. So you can pick and choose which one you want to go with. But is almost the big difference is almost always price. So a hotel would typically cost up to $100, sometimes, wow, depending on where you are, more. Maybe get it down to $80, $70, but very rarely less than that. Hostels, on the other hand, were more in the range of $20 to $50 per night.
Much better, yes.
Yes. So when you're spending a night in town, in a different town every week, then those costs can rack up pretty quickly. So, and my first couple times in town, I wasn't comfortable with the hostel idea, and so I did get a hotel, but I quickly realized that you're not getting great value for money, because if it's privacy you're concerned with, well, I have my own tent for the rest of the week, so I had plenty of privacy out in the woods, as much privacy as I wanted. And so one day in public, sleeping in public was not a huge issue to me. And more so, especially in those trail communities where most people that are staying at a hostel are hiking the AT, either through hiking or section hiking. A lot of those hostels will have shuttle services built into their pricing. So you would you could get a pickup from the trailhead and then get dropped back off at the trailhead, sometimes for free, not always, but sometimes included.
That's extremely convenient.
Yes. And hotels pretty much never had that service offered. So you're paying more and getting less.
Yeah. Wow. Good to know. Any chance that any of these hostels have private rooms? Because when I look for doing like an international trip, when I look up a hostel, sometimes they'll have private rooms.
Yes, a lot of hostels did offer private rooms, although I will say that most of them, they priced them on par with a hotel. So
sure,
if you had the cash to spend, but you wanted that community, you wanted that community environment and the service of likely getting a shuttle, then you could go to a hostel and get a private room, kind of get the best of both worlds.
Yeah. All right. And how did you hear about these hostels? Is this something that you did research beforehand, or was it, I'm at a trailhead or I'm at a break in the trail where there's a road and I need to look up a place now? How did you go about that?
So this is actually another thing that Far Out provided, as they had an addition to points of interest on the trail. They also have points of interest in towns near the trail.
Nice.
So grocery stores, some restaurants, I wouldn't say all of them, but some hotels and some hostels were all listed in Far Out. So you could plan ahead on the app and look what place looks interesting to stay at. And you can do more research on the internet. You Google, that town hostel, do those sorts of things. And then there's word of mouth on the trail. Some places I had no idea existed until like the day before I was going to stay at them.
So I'm doing a quick search now and I see it says Far Out Guides. Is that the actual name of the app?
Yep. I think that sounds about right. Is it
right.
An arrow, a red and white arrow?
A red and white arrow is the logo. Yeah.
Yep. That's it.
All right. Cool. Yeah. They say detailed guides for hikers, bikers, and paddlers. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, and just for full transparency, the app itself is free, but you have to buy the maps that are in it. And so,
ooh, do you ever? $60 for the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, $35. Wow. Okay.
And so, the Appalachian Trail it's a big trail, so the whole thing is $60, and you can buy just sections of the map, for like $6 or $7, I believe. It will end up being more if you bought it in sections than if you bought the whole thing all at once.
Yeah.
So if you had an idea of at some point in your life wanting to do the whole trail, then it would be more financially affordable just to buy it all at once.
Interesting. Cool.
But if you're bulking at that, you can just buy sections of the trail.
Yeah. Good. So with your camera, your two lenses, and you're charging your batteries in town, if I remember correctly, you're not a huge fan of the tripod. So did you bring a tripod with you at all on this trip?
So I did bring a tripod with me.
Okay.
So, and it's the Peak Design travel tripod.
Oh, right. I do remember that one. And you had it there at the workshop.
Yep. And on top of that, but I did compromise, as I did want a tripod especially for self-portraiture and time lapses, especially time lapses. Yeah. But the tripod itself was, even though it's a travel tripod, it's still quite a bit of weight when you consider considering that you're going to be carrying it for 2,000 miles.
Yeah.
So I actually put it into ultralight mode. Peak Design sells a modification for the tripod where you can buy these leg endings and so then you could put it into ultralight mode, but basically it has no legs, basically. So you know how most tripods have sections, they're leg sections.
Okay.
So ultralight mode, you pull out all the extra leg sections, so it's just the ones that are like integral to the tripod itself. And so it's basically just at knee height. You pull out all the extending legs, and then you put on the feet, and so it's just that the main column and the legs, and so it ends up being, you can get it up to a little over knee height. So you have a tripod, it just has a very limited elevation capacity.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. I didn't realize they did this. So normally the tripod has 3 or 4 leg sections. I can't remember how many.
Yeah, I think it's 4.
And so you're effectively, what you're doing is you're removing those bottom 3.
Yep.
And you have the main leg sections that connect to the apex area, which is what has the center column and everything else. And when you remove those bottom 3 leg sections and you replace it with these little feet,
yep.
you're saving
about a pound.
Almost half the weight, probably.
Yep, it's about half. You save about a pound of weight.
Wow.
So the tripod gets very light at that point. Very limited use, but it is very light. I don't think there's a lighter solution on the market except for maybe a platypod, in which case you're getting even less reach.
Yeah, because I think, I do have a platypod that I can use, and I don't know that I've taken it on any serious trip. I've done it out, for little things here and there, but it always seemed to be a little something extra for me. And something like this, I like this idea of being able to go ultralight because you still got it when you need it, but oftentimes, especially in the R5, with the in-camera body stabilization, image stabilization, and then that works in conjunction with whatever you got going on in the lens, it does a pretty decent job of stabilizing. And certainly, like you mentioned, for time lapse or some other things, you might want to still have that tripod, but otherwise, maybe it's a good idea to not limit yourself so much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially with the weight savings that you're going to gain with this.
Yep. It's big weight savings. And I will say the platypod is not well suited for backpacking, in the sense that that flat surface, if you're using a big camera like the R5, it gets very top heavy on a platypod. So if the platypod's not on like a level surface, it's going to fall over. And there are very few flat surfaces out in the wilderness. Yeah,
absolutely.
So you would really struggle to find a good place suitable for setting up a platypod, let alone where that ground up is the proper framing.
Yeah, precisely.
So even though, the travel tripod in ultralight mode, it's a lot more restricted than a normal tripod in terms of height, is definitely usable.
Very good. So how about this notion of just simply getting there? Did you because you currently live in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Yep.
And was that where you were stationed when you were in the military? Or just tell me about from wherever you lived, getting there to the trail and getting started. How did that journey happen?
Yep. So I was stationed in here at Fairbanks for the last 3 or 4 years before I got out. When I decided, when I put everything into motion, I kind of took advantage of the fact that I have family that still lives in Illinois, and so I used Illinois kind of as a base camp.
Oh, nice.
So I flew down to Illinois, hung out with the family for a couple days, and then I got a ride from my dad. He took us from Illinois to the start of the trail in northern Georgia.
Okay, cool.
So I flew down to Illinois, and then we drove by car to Georgia, and then he dropped me off there. I know a lot of other thru hikers who didn't have family that lived near in the south or on the East Coast. They would fly to Atlanta and then get a shuttle to the trailhead, which is not cheap for sure, but it's a one-time cost because you're only going there once.
Georgia-atclub.org.
I should mention that in addition to the many hostels and hotels along trail towns, there are also a lot of small shuttle services based in those trail towns as well. So
sure.
On the AT, there are dozens of shuttle options that can get you to or from the trail in town for relatively reasonable prices. The closer, the better, of course. And that was another thing that, you kind of had to budget into those extra expenses, was in addition to the hotel, the lodging, also the transportation. Because there were some towns that are literally right off of the trail, but the majority are a handful of miles away. So, and most through hikers, it's funny because, while a through hiker is doing 2,000 miles on the trail, most through hikers are very reluctant to hike off trail.
Hmm.
It's kind of interpreted as a waste of energy, a waste of time. If a town is 5 miles from trail, that's 2 hours of walking in one direction the wrong way, burning calories, burning daylight.
Pick me up already.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the vast majority of hikers will either pay for a shuttle or hitchhike. Hitchhiking is still a big thing on the Appalachian Trail.
I bet. So tell me about just the hike, a day in the life, possibly. Maybe share some of your favorite locations. Just help us out. What life is like on the trail?
Oh, yeah. So, and everybody had their own routine, I would say. I usually was hiking alone. I would camp with other people the majority of the time, but I would usually hike alone. Although on the AT, it's a very popular trail, so I would very rarely go a day without seeing somebody on trail. But for the most part, there's a lot of solitude out there, and so you get to enjoy the sounds and sights of nature, and and there's a huge variety of that between both location and season. So in those early months, it was more like winter time than summer. And up in the mountains in Georgia and North Carolina, there's no vegetation, or sorry, there's very little greenery until around May. Actually, most of April is pretty barren still up in the hills. So you go along and you could watch as the green up would go uphill, travel uphill as you would go along.
That's
cool.
Like
only at the beginning was only in the low valleys there would be any green up, and as the month progressed, it would just travel uphill until it finally reached the trail around May.
Seeing that transition, certainly that would be a really cool thing to experience as spring is coming in. You're just a part of it.
Absolutely. You get closer to nature in ways that you don't even think about while you're on the trail for such a long stretch of time.
And I think that's right there, because I started out this whole conversation thinking, I don't even know if this is going to be for me, if this was could be something that excites me or whatever. But when you say something like that, all of a sudden it's just like that piques an interest of some sort that dives deep into my soul, kind of a thing that says, that would be so cool.
And then, of course, the AT itself, it's not exclusively on top of mountains. It goes into valleys all the time. And so you would experience that where it'd be, you're high up and there's all the trees around you are still in their winter hibernation. And you get down into the valleys and everything is vibrant green.
Yeah. Oh, so cool.
And all along the way, you meet tons of birds. And you wouldn't see as many mammals, but they're definitely out there. And actually, did you know that deer can be actually very scary?
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah.
So most people probably don't know this, but deer, they can scream.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No, I guess I didn't know that.
And at night, I was sleeping in my tent. I think I was alone. Yep, I was alone that night. And just out of nowhere, I just heard this screech that sounded like a demon. And I had absolutely no idea what it was. It scared the heck out of me. and on top of that, I heard footsteps. So I was like, whatever the heck this is, it's really close to my tent.
Oh, yeah.
And it scared the heck out of me. And then further on, I learned that was the sound of a deer just screaming. And I figured that out in firsthand, because then another day, sometime later, I woke up at camp, went to the vegetation line to relieve myself, and I startled a deer. It was
dear.
really close to my camp, and he made the exact same sound as he ran away from me. It was such a shock, but also a revelation that, oh yeah, that's a deer, and it made that sound.
Confirmation.
Yeah.
But this time you actively caused it to
yes, yeah,
to freak out.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
That's
awesome.
It was you learn a lot of interesting things about nature.
Oh, that's so cool.
And then of course you're also going through, the different biomes, like with flowering plants and, different types of forests. So like in the south, in the springtime, you have all these rhododendrons, those vibrant pink flowers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are gorgeous.
Along the trail, there are sections where they're just everywhere. It is gorgeous.
And they get huge.
They do.
Yeah.
And the rhododendron groves, sometimes the trail will go through them.
Oh my.
They will be literal tunnels where it's
nice,
very dark, even at midday, where it's just almost darkness going through the thickets. It's just a really fascinating thing.
Very cool. And I mean, it's 2,000 miles. So you start in northern Georgia and you go all the way to Maine.
Mm-hmm.
In that whole space, that whole scope. And of course, you're at different locations at different seasons too. You're going up into Maine, New York, as you come into fall almost. Maybe August, as you get into September, we're almost at the fall season,
yes,
autumn season.
Especially if you're going south to north. Yeah, by the time you're in New England, it's definitely closer to fall.
Yeah.
Like Maine in September was solidly fall. There was trees were turning as I was going through.
That's, just to have that whole spectrum before you, where you start even before the trees leaf out, you experience that leafing in process. You're going through the whole thing with, the screeching deer and, I imagine there's just other critters, whether it's little bugs or salamanders or whatever the case is maybe you came across some bats, possibly. I don't know.
Didn't see very many bats, but there were all sorts of, very common sight, especially on the southern half of the trail, was red-spotted newts.
Okay, nice.
All over the place.
Wow.
Lots of frogs. I definitely saw several turtles and tortoises just walking on the trail with me.
Wow.
In fact, one time in New Jersey, near New York, I was on trail in a wildlife refuge. And there was a common snapping turtle traveling towards me on the trail. And that was talk about a dinosaur. Those snapping turtles are incredible looking.
Yeah.
And I disturbed it because it was traveling on the trail, and once it saw me, it kind of got off trail. But, I kind of think of it as I might have saved its life, because, the only reason that snapping turtles have a reason to be traveling on land is to go somewhere to lay eggs.
Okay.
And so males don't have any reason to go on land, travel like that. And so it was most likely a female, and it was heading towards a road. So I like to think that I might have saved its life.
There you go. And its babies.
Right.
If she was off to lay eggs. Or maybe she was just returning from laying eggs. Who knows, I guess.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
Hard to say for sure, but yeah, it was quite a something. And yeah, there are all sorts of experiences like that. along the way, and like in New Hampshire, I found there were gray jays at the top of one of the nearby peaks, and I was able to hand feed peanuts to these gray jays that would
Oh my.
come. You know, gray jays have a reputation for being very fearless around people, especially when food is involved, and so they didn't have any problem just coming to land on my hand and feed right off my hand.
Wow.
I was even able to trick them. I do the motion where, if I was offering them food, but I didn't have any food in my hand, and they would come to land anyway.
Oh, wow. All right, let's take a little bit of a tangent on our conversation and actually bring in some of your pictures. And let's talk about, let's see, I told it to sort via file name. There we go. So you should be able to see the pictures that we're looking at here. And you start out with a sunrise shot, and we're not going to talk about all of these. There are going to be, how many did you say you sent? About 40 some?
42, yeah.
42 images. So I do plan to put these in the Facebook group. That's the Great Outdoors Photography Podcast Facebook group. And then also you can click on the link. There'll be a show notes link where you'll be able to go to the show notes website and take a look at these there if you'd rather go there. Either place, you'll be able to take a look at these photos. And they should be showing up in order for you. It's just that we'll try to do our best to describe the image so you can find it easily and know which one we're talking about. But the first one we're going to talk about is titled 002. The AT with Jeremy is 002 if you happen to see file names. But what I'm wanting to hover about here is it's a pano, and a panoramic image of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And tell us a little bit about where this is from, the setup, and all that other good stuff.
So this photo is actually from Clingman's Dome.
Clingman's Dome, all right.
On the Great Smoky Mountains. That's the highest point on the Appalachian Trail, and this is at sunset.
All right.
And it is one of the I will say that the whole trail is beautiful in its own way, but the southern portion doesn't have as many, vast sprawling vistas. There's a lot of what you call the green tunnel, which is where trees are kind of blocking your view and blocking both the sun and any views that there might be. And so even before springtime, when everything was barren, you're still, tree branches everywhere. So not a whole lot of good views in the southern portions of the Appalachian and the AT. But in the Great Smoky Mountains, that's kind of the big exception. There were so many fantastic views. And one of the most impressive is they're right there at the top, on top of Clingman's Dome. And so I actually stayed there, this was one of my only nights where I deliberately night hiked because I wanted to catch sunset on top of Clingman's Dome. But when you're in the Great Smoky Mountains, you're not allowed to camp wherever you want to. You have to camp at specific sites.
Yeah.
So after sunset, I had to travel like another 4 miles to get to the nearest camp.
Oh, my.
But that was a deliberate decision I made because I had to capture. We had a beautiful day, as you can see. They're just these thin clouds, nothing crazy, and the promise was there of a fantastic sunset. So I made the decision to stay there for sunset and catch it.
Cool.
I think it paid out.
Yeah. So just looking at it on the map, Clingman's Dome is the southeast corner of Tennessee. It looks like. So Tennessee kind of comes in at a northeast tangent with the border of North Carolina. And then when it reaches Clingman's Dome, it runs directly to the west.
Yep. So almost all
the
of
state line border.
Almost the entirety of the Appalachian Trail in the Great Smoky Mountains is the Tennessee-North Carolina border.
Interesting. Cool. All right, let's take a look at a few other pictures. Is this next one, number 3, is this the same area?
Yeah, that is another part. That's the eastern part of the Great Smoky Mountains. If I recall correctly, let me see. This is just a view along the trail in the Great Smoky Mountains. Like, it doesn't even have a name on the map.
And did you have a GPS tracker going along with you so you could follow along and then tag these later on the GPS coordinates?
Yes, I actually had two. I have a Garmin Phoenix 6,
Okay.
which I was using to both track myself and I could use for geotagging. But my primary source for geotagging was actually a phone app I have called Geotag Photos 2. So you just start that at the beginning of the day, and then it would go throughout the day, and then turn it off, and it would automatically send the GPX file straight to a Dropbox folder. And
okay, cool.
It was actually very convenient after the fact that I would have all those files automatically sent to one location that I could then put them into Lightroom to upload the route and then
cool.
geotag the photos.
And I should make a correction. Clingman's Dome is not in the very southeast corner of Tennessee. I zoomed out a little bit. It's just there's a section there where the state line does travel directly east-west, and I kind of got fooled. I was zoomed in too much. So anyways, if someone is looking at that on the map, you'll realize it's a bit ways up the line from the absolute southeast corner of the Tennessee border. All right, back to the pictures. Yeah, this next one that we're going to look at is a trail that we're just, it's kind of just receding off into the distance. The reason I like this shot is we just have this foggy, mysterious area that you're hiking towards, and it just kind of gives us a good feel of, I guess, what the trail was like there, I would presume.
Yeah, absolutely, especially there in the Great Smoky Mountains, where you're in most of the Smokies are very high altitude for the AT. They're around 5,000 feet in a lot of stretches, which in an absolute sense, like compared to the Rockies, not very high. But on the AT, that's pretty tall. That's rough. That's taller than most of the rest of the trail. So you're pretty high altitude for long stretches of time, so you get a lot of mist and cloudy atmosphere. It can get very moody up there, and the temperatures, even that was April 30th, so it was the last day in April, and everything was starting to green up as you can see, but it was still very cool. Like, if I remember correctly, it was like the average temperatures are like in the 50s and 60s. It's very comfortable.
Sweet. And this sunset, you're zooming way in, and this next image, we have a little bit of the tufts of the clouds, the kind of coming in over a ridge, just a very little bit, and then we have some out of focus trees in the foreground area, some detail in the clouds with the sun right in the center of the frame. Tell us a little bit about this image.
Yes, so this image is kind of this is the quintessential reason why you don't, give up on a day just because the conditions that you're looking at right at the moment are terrible. Yeah. Because the majority of that day was completely socked in. There was no view. It was raining a good chunk of the day. But I camped out really close to a fire tower.
Ah, cool.
Not expecting to get anything out of it, but there right at sunset, there was a break in the clouds right on the horizon. The sun just went right through it, and it was
sweet. It
was an amazing view, and it only lasted for like a minute or two. So you had to be right place, the right time, and if you were pessimistic about what you were going to expect, you might have just set up camp and then just gone to sleep.
Right.
And you would have missed that.
Very cool. So as we come through with some other pictures, here's one that looks like it's a little horse, a little pony or something, and it has a foal.
Yeah, so a lot of people probably know about the wild ponies of Assateague Island in Maryland, but there's actually another place on the East Coast with wild ponies, and that's in the Grayson Highlands, the feral ponies of Grayson Highlands. And
that's so cool.
And the Appalachian Trail goes right through there.
Oh, wow. So we have what I would presume to be Mama Pony. She's grazing.
Yeah.
And we have this little shrub wannabe, so to speak, right between Mama Pony and the foal that's laying down on the ground on the left-hand side of the frame. And the foal is also looking outside of the frame, which is kind of interesting because it just tells us, it makes us think, the little baby is comforted by mom's presence, but looking elsewhere. There's just this different, she's not concerned about mom, as far as, are you here kind of a thing. It gives me a sense of confidence that the baby has, and it's feeling confident that it can just chill out and not have to worry about life right now.
And also that the foal is completely laid down apart from her head being erect.
Right.
She's completely laying on her side. And, horses, ponies don't typically do that unless they're either sick or they're very comfortable. They're very relaxed.
Right.
And the foals out there, there were several times where I would see them along the trail there. And it was so funny because they would just flop down, look dead. They'd just be lying completely on their sides, just taking a nap. And then this particular one was doing that exact thing, just laying down, and then suddenly just popped her head up.
Very good.
Just looking around.
Very good.
Looked very sleepy at the same time. It was so cute.
But that's what makes the picture. If the head were laying down, it'd be like, I think you've got a dead animal there.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Oh, this next picture looks like a little bit of it looks almost like Eagle Rock from the Angry Birds movie. In all seriousness, it looks like a diving board kind of a thing. Is this one of your self-portraits? This
is a self-portrait.
All right.
This is a very iconic spot on the AT called McAfee Knob. It's this big rock outcropping on the top of a decent-sized mountain in Virginia. And if you can't see it when you're standing there, but if somebody takes a photo of you, you can see that you're just jutting out over the abyss on this rock. And so it's an amazing view. I actually took a much more zoomed in shot of this, but I didn't like it quite as much because you're not able to see the vista off to the left, where it's just the horizon just goes on for miles.
Nice.
And so it's both a very cool place to be and also an amazing view where you can just see for ages. And I did talking about through hiking and photography, where photography has to take the back seat to hiking when you're on a through hike. So you can't just spend a day or two hanging out in one place just to get the right shot.
It's a good point. Yeah,
you could do that, but you would probably take a lot longer to finish your through hike if you were to do that, and it already takes a long time.
Especially if you have 2,000 miles.
Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of places you have to go there, and you have to just accept whatever conditions you're given. And so as it turned out, I got to McAfee Knob, or the trail just before it, at the end of one day. And so I got to McAfee Knob in the morning. So this is the rising sun. I got there, probably an hour or two later than I should have. This is already above, a little bit after sunrise. Could have been even better if it had been at sunrise.
Yeah.
Although for that day, I was actually told that there was no sunrise. Like it was clouded in for sunrise. So maybe this is the best I could have gotten for that day. But regardless, McAfee Knob is actually a sunset location. So when the sun is setting, it's front lighting people that are standing there, so you can actually see the people instead of being a silhouette. Yeah. I'm a silhouette in this shot. But at sunset, people can pose there on McAfee Knob, and you can see them and the landscape, and it's an amazing shot.
Cool.
But I was there in the morning, so I had to deal with had to accept what I was given in that sense.
Yep. Cool. Well, this next image, I was thinking I would probably go by it, but the clouds hovering over the hilltops it brings in some kind of ethereal message. Tell us about this experience.
And so this is one of my favorite conditions to experience on the Appalachian Trail, is a cloud inversion, where you have both clouds high in the sky and right along the ground.
Yeah.
And It's like you get a cloud sandwich where you got cloud, land, sky, cloud, and is some of the most magical experience. It is one of those things where it's both amazing to be physically there and to capture it on camera.
Yeah.
And this was,
very cool.
I believe, let me check real quick. Yeah, this was early morning. It might have even been before sunrise, or if not, right after sunrise. And so you get those cloud inversion conditions most often at sunrise, as everything is cool and wet, dew everywhere. And yeah, it adds a lot of character to the mountains, especially in the southern. This is still in Virginia. The southern AT. There's rolling mountains and hills all the time. You see them on the horizon, but they don't have a lot of character. It's kind of hard to get a good image of them without some accentuation of like these cloud inversions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what really helps. It's, I guess, a different sense of the layering of the hills, but it really helps give that definition of space too. So that's kind of cool. And then your next one is a panorama of that same effect.
Yes, a different scene, but it's the same concept. And this was actually a sunset. This was another scenario. Actually, this one has a great story to go with it. Is that I was climbing up to the Priest, which is another fairly famous, fairly well-known mountain on the AT. But the whole way up, it was completely socked in. There was just thick cloud cover. And so I got to the top of the Priest, got to a viewpoint where I camped out I was going to camp out there at the top of the mountain for the night. And so I took a time lapse of that evening, of that sunset. And initially there was some good view. It was okay. I could see like the valley in front of me, but not much beyond that. And then as the time lapse progressed, it completely clouded over. And when I ended that time lapse, I thought, well, that's it for the day. I'm probably just going to, just probably just good to go to sleep once the sun sets. But at the last minute, I decided to go walk the 50 feet to the viewpoint just to check it out. And the clouds had opened up to what we're seeing here in this image. And
Wow.
You just see for miles where there's clouds right in the valley, in all of the valleys, there are clouds everywhere, but you could see all the mountaintops off into the distance. And it was definitely a top 10 moment on the AT. And I literally, when I walked up the viewpoint, I thought I got teleported because it was a completely different view from what it had looked like before, even before the clouds had parted, had moved in.
But it's like you mentioned earlier, it's about reacting to what you're given as well, just taking advantage of what you got.
Yeah, exactly. You just kind of have to accept the conditions you're given. And sometimes you get skunked. Sometimes you get amazing views like that.
Yeah. Cool. All right. As we move along, another self-portrait, it looks like. Maybe you've got your headlamp on and we've got some star trails, minimal streaking happening, but a good twilight type image.
Yes. Yeah, it's a late twilight. So that the color out actually in the corner is actually light pollution. We're finally in the mid-Atlantic. This is in Pennsylvania, looking to the south, I believe, towards Washington, possibly. So in the mid-Atlantic, it's a lot more developed than the southern Appalachians. So it's so you get a lot more light pollution at night.
Sure.
And so and I hadn't taken advantage of capturing the stars prior to that. I kind of took them for granted because it was, there was so many clear night skies. But now that I was getting into the mid-Atlantic, I wanted to capture the stars as best I could. And there was this rocky outcropping near where I was camping. And so I was able to get this upward look with me posing. And there was just enough haze in the sky that my headlamp was shining a light that you could see.
Cool. All right. As we move on, and certainly, folks, I'm not commenting on every single one of them, but as you look at them in the Facebook group or on the website, in particular the Facebook group, you'll be able to comment on them. And certainly you could ask Jeremy anything specific about the images that you're looking at there. And that would certainly that would be just fine to get in there, comment, ask questions. Let's talk about this one, Jeremy. We've got a row of trees here that is the primary foundational element. And then we just have all this atmosphere going up to, I'm going to take a guess and say this is sunset, but I honestly don't know. Is it sunrise or sunset?
This is actually sunrise.
Sunrise, all right. And so we just have the sun just kind of peeking through at the beginning of the day, and we have all this layering of the subtle hills here, though. It's not this massive, peaks and things like that we sometimes see. This one is really more subtle and more relaxed, and it's a nice pano.
Mm-hmm. And this is on top of Glastonbury Mountain here in the southern portions of Vermont. So we're finally getting into New England, and this area. This is not something that really got captured in the image, but Glastonbury Mountain has a fire tower on top of it, and so, but it's tree covered. The hilltop, the mountaintop is covered in trees. It's below tree line, so the only way you get a view is at the top of the fire tower. But you have this effect while you're up there that you're like on this island in the sky, especially that morning where there was a lot of low-lying mist and cloud, where it just looked like all the mountains were islands in an ocean of cloud. And so I was at on this tallest island surrounded by trees. So I had like this foreground ring of trees all around me, and then there were just these hills off in the distance looking like islands thanks to all that cloud. And then on top of that, just enough broken sky where the sun is able to peek out and make add just the right splash of color to add to the scene.
Cool. Tell me about these rock cairns here on this image.
In that image, we're getting into New Hampshire, towards the White Mountains, which are pretty famous for being very rugged mountains there in New England. And we're getting pretty far to the north in terms of latitude, so things can get pretty extreme in the wintertime. But despite that, I think there's still a lot of people that will hike in the wintertime, and so a lot of those mountain trails will have cairns alongside them so that people can still navigate even in the wintertime when you can't see the ground.
Very cool. And
there are no trees. We're above tree line here, so there are no trees to put directions or to put trailblazes on. So they set up you'll find a lot of cairns out there.
Huh. That's cool.
For navigation.
Here's another self-portrait. Looks like you're on top of a massive set of boulders, massive set of rocks with the clouded sky in the background.
Yes, this is Mount Liberty.
Cool.
There in the White Mountains, on the southern end of what's called Franconia Ridge. We'll see in the next image, but it's just one of the most amazing areas in New Hampshire and really the entire Appalachian Trail. And so where I was in that previous image is, if you can zoom in all the way, you can actually see it in that mountain to the left, that rocky outcropping. If you were to zoom in on the next image, unfortunately I can't point on the map on your screen. Go back one.
Okay.
So counting the distinct peaks from left to right, that's the first one. The second peak, you zoom in there, that's where I'm sitting on that on the previous image.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And so Franconia Ridge, and this is off of the ridge looking back at the ridge. It's an amazing view, and I got amazing weather conditions up there. It was extremely thick clouds up above, and then the clouds would just roll through. And then towards the end of the day, this is sunset, there was just a huge break in the clouds, letting all this sunlight shine through, giving a lot of depth to those mountains.
Cool.
It was just a really memorable experience for sure.
All right. And as we kind of come towards the end, is this some kind of ptarmigan?
I thought the exact same thing when I first saw it, but it's actually a spruce grouse.
And grouse, okay.
Spruce grouse and ptarmigan look very similar to each other, but there are some subtle differences. And this particular spruce grouse, it was really funny. She was like, she was leading me along the trail for like 100 feet. She didn't want to get off. She didn't want to get off the trail. She didn't want to be near me, but so as I would keep going, she would just lead me on the trail for a long while, and it was a very funny experience.
Awesome. All right, tell me about. We have this overview from up top, and we're looking at some kind of lake here with lots of islands in it.
Yep. So now we're in Maine, and
Nice.
Maine has an astoundingly large number of lakes. As I was actually kind of surprised to see how many lakes they had, and you get a lot of mountainside views with lakes in the valleys. And the forest up there is actually not too dissimilar from Alaska. Actually, there's a lot of parallels. And so when the right cloud conditions in conjunction with the lakes is just a very otherworldly sight. Is kind of hard to describe, but it's just
Well, that's the kind of thing that, especially the one who is, the one experiencing it, the one making these images, I think that's the kind of experience I look for when I'm out there too, is to say, hey, I had this special experience that has meant something to me. Certainly, I hope I can communicate that in my photography, and I hope that it comes through at least a tiny amount. But also, it's very valuable to just talk about it and to share this kind of idea as we look at the pictures. People can listen in on what we're saying and then go look at the pictures and kind of get that extra sense of reality of what this location is about, what it is, and what it meant to us. Tell me about this waterfall that we're looking at now.
Yeah, sure thing. So this was is really more of a cascade. The telephoto. This is shot at 98 millimeters, just about 100 mil. So it's nicely compressed. So it's actually a cascade that's going at like a 30-degree angle on the terrain.
Okay, sure.
And off to my right, camera right, there is a shelter right there. And so actually, this is something we should have talked about more earlier on. But on the AT, all along the trail, there are trail shelters. So if you don't want to, in fact, some people will actually do the entire trail without a tent.
Wow.
I think that's insane, but some people would. There's enough shelters that you can actually plan your route, and so stop every night at a shelter. And a shelter is basically a big lean-to. It's a hut with 3 walls and one side open.
Yeah.
So you have shelter from the rain and the elements, but you still have a view out, looking out, and you're still like in nature. You're not like just shut in a cabin. And there's dozens of them all along the AT. And one of them here in Maine was right next to this river, this mountain stream. And if you go down to right at the side of the stream, look to the side, there's this huge cascade right in your face. And it was
cool.
One of the most, considering that it was right in the heart of the woods, it was one of the most scenic shelter sites out there. And it's like somebody set this up so that you could, experience this cascade.
Absolutely.
Right in your experience this right in your face. And it's actually a plus and a minus, because the cascade is close enough to the shelter that you can easily hear it from the shelter.
Yeah,
so if you don't like a lot of white noise while you're sleeping, you probably wouldn't get a lot of rest there. But if you love white noise, it would have been fantastic.
Cool. All right, we're coming towards the end here, and we'll end with this image. It's a nice. We got fog lifting off the body of water, a little island with a tiny little tree growing on it, and then some evergreen type trees in the background. Tell us about this image.
Yep. So this is right at the end of the trail, in the 100-mile wilderness in Maine, which is for folks going northbound is the final stretch before the very end of the trail at Mount Katahdin. And so this is one of the last lakes. Almost every shelter in northern Maine was along a lakeside, and so this was one of the last ones. And so I got up before dawn and witnessed this scene where it's just the lake, the trees all around, and this mist and fog rolling through along the lake, because lakes love to form fog, especially outside of actually most seasons. That interplay of water and the air will just create a lot of atmosphere. And then so the sun had started to come up, and it just lit that fog up. And so the sun itself was too bright to capture effectively, but it lit up all the fog, and it was like it set it on fire. And
nice.
It was a really nice view.
Very cool. So let's talk now about, we're going to get back to the idea of effectively, I guess, just finishing up the hike. You said this last picture was right towards the end.
Yep, and those last two were actually on Mount Katahdin, which is the terminus of the AT, the northern terminus of the AT.
Sure.
And it's not the tallest mountain on the AT, but it's one of the steepest. It's really a big culmination. It's like if you can climb this, you can do anything. Kind of experience. And it's extremely rugged. Like this last image, there are two people on this ridgeline. You might be able to see them. They're silhouetted there. Yeah. That's how big this landscape is, how big those boulders are. It's extremely rugged, extremely intimidating terrain. But it's as like the end of this 2,000-mile trip. I couldn't think of a better place to culminate the whole experience.
Nice.
It was an amazing 5 months, and yes, and so Mount Katahdin is the end, and it's a very controlled environment. Baxter State Park in Maine. It's actually kind of hard to get in. It's very popular. It's one of the most popular places in Maine, and so I think if you're just trying to camp or visit the park, you need there's like a reservation system, and so you have to plan it far in advance to actually get into the park. But for through hikers, there's a campground and shelter specifically for through hikers in the park.
Cool.
Which has a capacity limit. There's like somewhere around a dozen through hikers at a time can stay there. And so if you're above limit, you either have to wait outside the park to go in, or you have to camp outside the park and then hike in from outside the park. But I got lucky and was able to stay in right there in the park.
Very cool.
And so that Baxter State Park is also where you get off the trail permanently when you're going northbound. Okay. And so you arrange for a shuttle to pick you up there at one of the nearby campgrounds, and they will take you to nearby town of Millinocket, which is one of the closest towns.
Man, I'm looking at it on the map as you talk about it. Baxter State Park is huge.
Yeah, it's big. Most of it is very flat, but you've got Mount Katahdin there as the centerpiece of the park.
Yeah.
And it's a colossal mountain.
Huh. So you then are able to arrange for a shuttle to pick you up, and they take you into town.
Yep.
And do you stay in a hostel there? Do you catch transportation to continue on?
Yep, you have multiple options but I think since you're probably going to spend a big chunk of the day in Baxter State Park on top of Mount Katahdin, so you probably want to take a rest as soon as you can, and so that earliest spot is Millinocket. Yeah, there are hotels and hostels. Actually, Millinocket is a very small town, so there's probably more hostels than hotels there. Yeah, so you spend the night there, and from there you can get another shuttle that will take you to, I think, Medway. Yeah. And then at Medway you can get well, now we're talking about getting completely off the trail, and so
right. I mean, we're back to it's I-95 at Medway.
Yep.
And I imagine maybe you can get a Greyhound bus or something like that.
Yep. So several different ways to get off trail. You can get picked up by family members or friends at Millinocket or at Baxter State Park. If you're trying to get home yourself, which is actually what I did do, I got a shuttle from Millinocket to Medway, and then at Medway I caught a bus. It wasn't a Greyhound, but it was it was a local company that operates just there in Maine, and it sent me down. Let me try to remember off the top of my head. I think I took the bus ride all the way to Boston, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And so the goal was to get to an Amtrak station.
Okay.
There are Amtrak stations up in Maine as well, but the one with the most options is in Boston.
Sure.
So from Boston, I caught the Amtrak, and that took me. Well, actually, I caught two Amtraks. I got one into New York, stayed the night in New York, and then another one that got me all the way back home to Illinois.
So in the matter of 24 hours, you go from out in the complete wilderness to one of the biggest cities on earth.
Yes.
What a contrast.
Indeed. Absolutely.
Is there any type of, I guess, for lack of better description, any type of culture shock that you kind of experience when you get back that quickly? I mean, to me, I would be like, I just want to have one more day at Katahdin or something along those lines. Just take me back one more day.
Yeah. Right. It's when you're out there for 5 months, you get comfortable with, being out in the wilderness, but you're also close to, but still removed from society in a lot of ways. And, if prior to being on the trail, you were well integrated into society and, in the internet culture, you can miss that to a large extent. Because, you can talk about signal along the Appalachian Trail. So, cell signal does exist on the AT. It's it can be very spotty at times, and there are definitely, I would estimate that it was probably 50% of the time where I was camping, I had at least a little bit of signal, but then the other 50% of the time I had nothing.
Wow.
And so, you can, there are certain creature comforts associated with easy access to communicate with friends and family, and then having the access to the internet that you can, come to miss. And so, after 5 months, there's a certain level of exhaustion that sets in.
Yeah, that's true.
On the one side, all the things you've seen and experienced and enjoyed, you're missing that it's coming to an end. But then there's another side that's like, it's time to move on. There's kind of an acceptance, and, maybe that's a sign that you've done it at the right. You've experienced everything that you've needed to, and you're ready to move on to the next phase. And for me, that's what I was there for, was to find a bookend to end my previous chapter and start my next one. So I think that was exactly what I needed.
That probably helps along that line too, where it's not your normal walk in life, so to speak, but this was something that you had been planning for quite some time. You experienced it, that you come to the end and you realize, this part is over, and this is just part of the transition of moving on. The fact that I go from wilderness to downtown concrete jungle in a matter of 24 hours is just the way it is. That's what happens when you finish your trip.
I've got to say, actually, now that I'm thinking back on it, the thing that struck me the most as it was happening, as I was doing that transportation, was not the the urban experience, being back in civilization, being back in the cities. Yeah. It was the speed.
Sure.
it was 5 months of walking and traveled 2,000 miles.
Yeah.
But, 5 months is a very long time. And then in the course of 48 hours, I had traveled almost the exact same distance. That was something that I really is like, was this worth it? And, if you had been on the fence about it, you would have been so frustrated with yourself.
Yeah.
It was,
that's so cool. Yeah, that's a good.
It was a very interesting feeling.
And then when you flew home, I mean, you're probably another 4,000 miles, and you did that in a matter of 6 to 8 hours. So,
yeah, flying is. I'm going to say, flying for me has always felt very abstract because
Sure.
you get in the plane, you can see the ground at the airport, and then you take off, and you're like in another universe.
Yes.
And so you can't fully appreciate how fast you're traveling, how far you're going, because it just feels like you're being teleported from one airport to the other.
And especially when you go to a different country, there's something about being in that tube, being in that pill, I should probably put it. You're in this little bubble, and there's a little bit of a transition of the culture difference when you get on, especially if you get on an airplane that is based in the country you're going to. Certainly they're going to have some of their cultural norms coming through and how they deal with the crew, or how they deal with the passengers, I should say. But then, of course, when you get off, I'm in particular thinking about when I went to India. It's just like, bam.
Yeah.
It is so different in about 3 seconds. It's just like, okay, this is definitely, and your description of calling it abstract, or just, it is definitely a removal. When you're going on the train or the bus and you can see the ground moving beneath you.
Exactly.
There's a huge difference there.
It's the same experience as walking. It's just much faster.
Yes.
And so it's very much in that same mindset. You're in the same mindset of traveling along the ground. And so you can you can do that compare and contrast much more easily, where I just walked 2,000 miles and it took me 5 months. Whereas I'm on this bus and I'm on this train and it's taken me about the same distance, but in 2 days.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Jeremy, is there anything else that we need to know about this? Anything last ideas that you wish to get across to everyone who's tuning in here?
Well, I think one of the most important things that you could take away from the Appalachian Trail is, even though it is a 2,000 mile route all the way from northern Georgia all the way into Maine, and you can do it all at once, you absolutely don't need to. And there were many more people there on the trail that were just doing it for a section hike or a day even. And so, and it's a good reminder that there are millions of people that live within 100 miles of the Appalachian Trail. And so you don't need to take a huge amount of time to go experience it. You can just take a week, 2 weeks, however much time you want, and go out there and get a taste of it yourself. And so, the AT is certainly not reserved for thru hikers. You don't have to be a thru hiker to experience it. It is certainly a very unique experience to do it that way, but many more people will experience it piece by piece. And that's just an equally valid way to get out there and explore and see things.
Yes, absolutely. And might inspire, more as you get out on a little piece of it and you're just like, hey, this is pretty sweet. Let's go see more of it. And then maybe you can section it together rather than doing it. Because that's probably really more what I would have to do until I retire, is section it together, because with kids at home and, a job to think about and the like, there's just no way that I could ever dedicate 5 or 6 months to something like this. But if you've got the ability to do that, more power to you. And, you just kind of, the listener that's out there who's pining for something like this is kind of like me, where we have to live a little bit vicariously and just enjoy the experience through others talking about it and everything else that we can do to learn about these types of things. So thank you so much for being here and helping us understand what it takes to be a photographer, especially going on a through hike, in this case on the Appalachian Trail. I really do appreciate it.
It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Is there any website or anything else that you'd like people to know about? They can see more, otherwise contact you or anything along those lines?
Well, yeah, I'm most active on Facebook, social media wise. I have an Instagram as well, not as active on it. I was during the trail. If you wanted to scroll back in my back catalog, you could see cool. I posted an image almost every couple of days while I was on the trail. My handle on Instagram is Trail Explorer Photos, all one word. And then my personal website is trailxpart.com. But I'm just a hobbyist. I'm not doing anything professionally, photography-wise.
Awesome. trailxpart.com and your Instagram, Trail Explorer Photos, right?
Yep, that's it.
Sweet. Well, thanks again, Jeremy. That'll wrap us up for now. And boy, this just been very good, very enlightening, very thorough as well. I just loved all the information you were able to share with us today. So thanks so much.
It's been my privilege. Thank you.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I just love conversations like these with people who have done something fairly extraordinary. And they are definitely moved by the experience. They have a reason, a purpose, something that really is very meaningful for why they do these kinds of things. And to understand that, I really am, I am always enriched, and I'm always just thrilled to hear stories like this. So if you know of someone who's done something similar, I would love for you to let me know, especially if you think they would like to be interviewed. I would love for you to let me know who they are, maybe what their contact info is, or even if they just have an Instagram handle or some other way that I can look up this person and just maybe reach out to them as well. I would love to have those recommendations from y'all. All right, our dose of inspiration today comes from Micah 6:8, and it says, "The Lord has told you what is good, and this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." I really love that walk humbly portion there. It is really important, whether we're out in the great outdoors, whether we're in a big city, whatever the case is. I do try myself, and I fail often, but being humble and not being this ultimate verbose and just, the annoying idiot type of syndrome that sometimes it can get the best of us. But yes, kind of calmly walking humbly. And that, to me, that's what allows me to absorb when I'm out there, to absorb everything that's around me and to really then let it sink in. I've had this question in the past about, just what is it like? What do you do when you're out there? What's the motivation, that kind of a thing. And I think I'm going to be bringing this into a future episode where it's really about solving a problem. When you're out there, when you are miles from the trailhead, maybe you just walked 50 feet from your car to this overlook or to this waterfall or whatever the case is. But that sense of humility, that's what I get when I'm in the great outdoors. I get this sense of humility of there's just so much that is so much bigger than me. And I look at it and say, what do I want to communicate? And once I can figure out what I want to communicate, it's time to go into it. It's time to dive deep and see what we can do to make this a reality, to make this happen. All right, we have two other, in continuing this dose of inspiration, I usually also have these quotes from other, at least somewhat well-known people. This first one is actually an opera singer. I'm not a follower of opera by any means. I just did a quick little search on some quotes for the outdoors and things like that. And Beverly Sills came up. And her quote is, "There are no shortcuts to any place worth going." I love that too. There are no shortcuts to any place worth going. And even if there were a shortcut, I suppose, yay, that's awesome. But really, it's about the journey getting there too. So I'm all about the journey. I'm about the destination too, but I love the journey. And so I'm not usually motivated to take shortcuts. I'm interested. I'm curious. I'm always looking to see what's around the next corner. And then this next one, really do love this one too. Sir Edmund Hillary. "It's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves." That, I think Jeremy, I don't know, certainly he's offline now. This is me wrapping up the show all by myself, but there's something there when I read this quote after re-listening to this whole conversation that I had with Jeremy. And as I went through and edited this show, and it just really, I came across this quote and I was just like, that is beyond perfect. I love it. So no shortcuts, definitely, to any place worth going. And it's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves. Ah, beautiful stuff, beautiful stuff. All right, so do take a look at those show notes on the website. The link is the first link in your podcast player. And I look forward to having you around for the next time, where we're going to talk about all my plans for my trip to Alaska. It is going to be a camping trip. I'm not going to do any traditional backpacking per se. I will definitely do a bunch of hiking, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Until next time, God bless and happy shooting.